I want to welcome you to a special presentation by the Washington County Historical Society in celebration of Black History Month. I want to welcome you to another episode of Laid Back History. Now, we had originally planned on airing the episode on Dr. Charles Pruner West today. But because of some delays in the production of that video, we're pushing that back till next week. So next week, we're going to have two episodes. We're going to show one on Tuesday and one on Thursday. The first one on Pruner West, and then we have another one on Black-owned businesses in Washington in the 1950s. And I'm very excited about that episode. It's going to be a nice look at some of the research we've done and some of the resources that we use to do that research. And I think it's going to be a great episode and tell some really neat history. But tonight, we're going to present an episode or a video, I guess, that we did a little while ago on the history of the LeMoyne Community Center. What an amazing history that it really is. Dating back to the early 1900s with Reuben Wasler Jr., eventually becoming the Neighborhood House Association, and then in the 1950s, you have the LeMoyne Community Center dedicated. And it cannot be overstated the impact that organization has had on this community. We think of it today as something dedicated to kids, but it wasn't always that. It used to be kids and adults, people of all ages. There was a lot of different programming there. Today they focus more on kids because they see that as such an important mission to help lift children up and provide activities and classes outside of regular school. And so just some incredible work that they are doing. And this video takes a look at that history, going all the way back from its origins in the 1920s. So I hope you enjoy it. And I will see you next week as we present the two episodes in celebration of Black History Month. The rich historical legacy of the LeMoyne Community Center dates back over 90 years, and the origins of this concept go back even earlier. In this special video presentation, we'll learn about some of the many amazing people that have guided the formation, growth, and resurgence of this vital community asset. In the late 1800s and early 1900s, Robert R. Forrest, a wealthy carriage maker, owned 3 acres of land on which the LeMoyne Community Center would ultimately come to stand. Forrest was a man well ahead of his time, a man who believed in creating an inclusive place where the community's youth could develop in a safe, caring environment. In the years following Robert's death in 1926, his heirs made Forrest's house at 240 Forest Avenue available for use by the community as a venue for education and recreation. In the late 1920s, proponents of an official neighborhood house in the 3rd Ward of Washington began meeting in the basement meeting hall of the Wright Memorial Church. This effort was led by Reuben W. Wasler Jr. Wasler was one of Washington's first Black police officers as early as 1915, a veteran of World War I, a sports and entertainment promoter, and one of the leading business minds in the African American community. In 1938, the Forrest House was formally dedicated as the Robert R. Forrest Neighborhood House. Critical to the effort was Washington Steel founder Tecumseh Sherman Fitch, who served as chairman of the Neighborhood House Association. The early 1940s saw an infusion of youthful energy into the Forrest Neighborhood House, mainly in the person of Pearl Elizabeth Propps Harris. The story of Pearl Propps has profound meaning. Born and raised in Washington, Pearl Propps graduated from Wash High in 1925 and continued her education at California Normal School, where she became one of the very few African Americans to attain a teaching degree. Even after her marriage to Gus Harris in 1943, Pearl Harris was affectionately known as Miss Pearl. She would later become a kindergarten teacher, the directress of the organization, and would serve the organization in other capacities for more than 30 years. Lorraine Walls Perry, one of Miss Pearl's kindergarten students, fondly recalled her influence.
One of my earliest memories is going to kindergarten and my teacher, Mrs. Pearl Harris. We all called her Miss Pearl. One of my favorite times of day in kindergarten was story time, and we always wanted to hear the story Bluebeard. Miss Pearl would say, it's story time, what do you want to hear? And we would all scream, Bluebeard, Bluebeard, Bluebeard. But Miss Pearl told the story differently every time. And it was always full of suspense and always full of surprises. And we were screaming and hugging each other like we were afraid, but really we were not. So we never knew how the story was going to end. But Miss Pearl made it fun for us every time. And that was really her gift, working with children. And she loved all of us, and we loved her dearly.
In 1950, a swimming pool was constructed and kitchen facilities were added in 1951. By the early 1950s, the Forrest House had become known as the LeMoyne Community Center in honor of local abolitionist Dr. Francis Julius Lemoyne. Among the multitude of activities and programs conducted at the LeMoyne Center in the early 1950s were kindergarten, teenage club, boys club, story hour, Girl Scouts and Brownies, women's knitting, and children's crafts. In 1955, the Neighborhood House Association formally linked the programs at the LeMoyne Center and the Bronson House for funding purposes. And the LeMoyne Community Center Committee determined that a modern fitness and recreation facility was needed in the 3rd Ward. This effort culminated with the completion of a new gymnasium facility in 1956. Branch Rickey and Jackie Robinson were on hand at the dedication ceremonies. The gymnasium itself was named in honor of benefactor and then Mayor of Washington, T.S. Fitch. During this exciting period from the late 1950s and into the early 1960s, the LeMoyne Community Center emerged as a beacon of goodwill in the community, led by the LeMoyne Community Center Committee. The pastor of the Wright Memorial A.M.E. Zion Church had a prominent role on this committee, and in the early 1960s, that pastor was Reverend Ralph N. Reynolds. Reverend Reynolds was a beloved figure in the community, and it was an enormous loss when he died suddenly of heart problems in 1963. In the 1970s, the LeMoyne Community Center began a formal separation from the Neighborhood House Association and became incorporated as a standalone nonprofit organization. Among the leaders of the organization at that time were Francis Factor, James McGuire, Nettie Brent, Melvin Richards, and Joan Griffin. The 1980s continued to be a vibrant era for the LeMoyne Center. Astra Lloyd began her service at the LeMoyne Community Center in 1984. She would go on to serve until 1991. By the late 1990s, however, the LeMoyne Center had fallen on hard times. The center's local corporate funding declined as local businesses operated by community leaders increasingly became a thing of the past. The swimming pool, such a wonderful community asset since the 1950s, was filled in because the center could no longer bear the cost of repairs. Perhaps the lowest point came in October 2004 when the LeMoyne Center attic was damaged by arson. For more than 3 years, the center would remain closed. In 2007, Joyce Ellis accepted the challenge of leading a resurgence of the LeMoyne Community Center. For Joyce, a failure of the center was simply not an option. Through her devotion and tireless efforts, little by little and piece by piece, the LeMoyne Center was reclaimed from the ashes. In 2009, Camp Challenge was established as a summer program to inspire, develop, and educate our youth through sport and recreation programs. Camp Challenge was the validation of Joyce's vision that the LeMoyne Center could once again be a pillar of strength in our community. And in 2010, a grant enabled the groundbreaking on the construction of a new addition for community action. So today, the leadership continuum of the LeMoyne Community Center continues with Linda Harris and her team of devoted staff and volunteers. And the LeMoyne Center continues to promote the two essential principles of the original Neighborhood House program: the strengthening of family life and the development of better neighborhoods. The LeMoyne Community Center continues to develop, shape, and stabilize our community. Its rich legacy of leadership and compassion goes on.